Can it be a functioning democracy, or is it headed for all-out autocracy?
Let's speak about this with my guest, Soner Çaptay, Senior Fellow and Director of the Turkish Research Program at the Washington Institute. Soner, good to see you again.
It's a great pleasure.
So we're seeing protests extend into another night in Istanbul. Are you surprised that we've seen this energy continue every day now since the arrest of Mr. Imamoglu?
Quite a bit, because I think even considering the trajectory of President Erdogan in Turkey, and I've followed his career and written his biography, The New Sultan, even I'm surprised by this development. Analysts, including myself, had until now considered and called Turkey's political system competitive authoritarianism. I think by arresting his key opponent, Erdogan is taking the competitive adjective out of the system, and it's about to become purely authoritarian. So a lot of voters are resisting this, and Turkey was a democracy twice longer than Erdogan has been president. So I'm not surprised that hundreds of thousands, millions are perhaps demonstrating now across city squares in Turkey.
We know that, we've heard the government say, look, the judicial branch is separate and there has been no influence here. This is not political persecution. And President Erdogan said this is a movement of violence provoked by the opposition. Is there truth to that?
Not really. I think, as the old Soviet formula says, show me the man, I'll find you the crime. In this case, the prosecutors have found a plethora of crimes to target and assail Mayor Imamoglu. These range from terrorism to nepotism to rigging tenders to corruption. In the last decade, Turkey has gone through the equivalent of state capture by President Erdogan. The country now has no independent institutions, very few independent courts and media outlets, and those are counting their days as independent outlets. So Erdogan, I think, is relying on his incumbency advantages rooted in state capture to make sure that the support for the opposition candidate Imamoglu doesn't surf. Imamoglu, I think, is a mortal threat to Erdogan. He was defeating him before he was, of course, sent to jail in every two-way race for the presidency. Elections are not held until 2028, but I think Erdogan saw a mortal threat. Imamoglu's party, Republican People's Party, CHP, was about to vote him in their primaries to anoint him as their president in waiting, and Erdogan thought that at that point it would be too difficult for him to go after him. Imamoglu is indeed very relatable, very charismatic, like Erdogan. Yeah. He's rooted in Turkey's hinterland, Anatolia. He's a pious Muslim and a Turkish nationalist, all qualities like Erdogan's. But unlike Erdogan, whose base is exclusively right-wing, Imamoglu's base is right and left-wing and centrist voters, and he's a broad coalition. That is the threat that Erdogan saw in Imamoglu, in my view.
What do we know about President Erdogan's popularity right now?
It has gone down. It's the first time that his party, Justice and Development Party, AKP, lost elections recently. These were local elections, but nationwide polls were held last year. And Imamoglu was showing in every poll, defeating Erdogan. I think President Erdogan realized that this was a moment where he had to act, and he's leveraging the global environment. United States is facing inward. EU is looking at Turkey as a defense partner in the Trump era, where it needs to have a strong military add to European security, whether it's stabilizing Ukraine post-conflict or stabilizing Syria to prevent refugee flows. In the last decade, Erdogan has framed Turkey as a very powerful swing state that plays Russia, US, and Europe against each other. So I think President Erdogan is expecting no meaningful international pushback, and he might be right in this regard.
It's always difficult to predict what happens with these protests, obviously, but in the past we have seen the Erdogan government use a very heavy hand and police presence, for example. We've seen that with these protests as well. Where do things go from here for the protesters if Mr. Imamoglu, for example, is not released?
So 10 years ago, Turkey went through a massive protest called Gezi Park protests. A number of protesters were killed at the time. I think that was an inflection point in President Erdogan's career. I think we're approaching another one. If he keeps Imamoglu in jail and he's disqualified from running to contest President Erdogan, at that point you could say that Erdogan has removed the competitive adjective from Turkey's political system. If you pick your opponent, this system is no more democratic because you're basically winning by picking your opponent. And at that point, I think Imamoglu's greatest strength is the Imamoglu brand itself. The fact that he's relatable and charismatic, has Anatolian roots, but also can appeal to leftist and centrist voters as a social democratic politician, makes him very attractive. And on top of it, I think Imamoglu is 20 years younger, so he appeals to the electorate as someone who has a fresher image. The only thing perhaps that could be a game changer, if not for peaceful protest, is global markets. It's the one thing about Turkey over which President Erdogan has no control.
Yeah.
If markets realize that Turkey looks like Belarus in terms of its democratic freedoms, they may decide not to put money into the country going forward, and that could act as a course changer for President Erdogan.
Okay, Senator Cheptai, really good to get your analysis here again on BBC News. Thanks for joining us. Now, U.S. and Russian officials have been meeting in Saudi Arabia.